Will is a struggling student at a prestigious magic academy. Lacking magical talent, he compensates by wielding a sword against his foes. During a class taught by Professor Edward, who loathes him for his failures, Will is unexpectedly called up to demonstrate a fire spell using magical catalysts. Knowing Will can't use magic, Edward revels in the chance to humiliate him. As Will fumbles to cast the spell, the class erupts in laughter. Edward silences them, eager to personally mock Will for his ineptitude. One student, Sean, casts the fire spell from his seat, creating a catalyst right in front of Will. Edward, while indifferent to Will's safety, is wary of his reputation being tarnished if something goes wrong. He reprimands Shan for his recklessness, who apologizes, claiming he was trying to help Will. Edward concludes the demonstration with a speech on magic supremacy, directly targeting Will. Exhausted from the ridicule, Will leaves class only to be taunted further by Cheyenne, a classmate. However, Colette, a kind-hearted honor student, steps in to defend him. Cheyenne questions her loyalty given Will's near-failing grades, but Colette insists that Will's hard work and kindness make him worthy of support. Cheyenne and his crew back off, allowing Colette and Will to walk together. Colette urges him not to let the insults get to him, but Will brushes it off, feeling lucky that someone as cute as Colette wants to hang out with him. Embarrassed by his compliment, she tells him flattery won't change her mind about dating him, but Will insists he's just being honest. This only makes Colette blush more, as she pushes him away to regain her composure. As they stroll, Will gazes at the beautiful sky, reflecting on how long ago people lived in fear of the celestial rulers until the Shadow Wizard, Money Gang, united with others to overthrow them, ushering in a new era. Colette wonders if the Ice Maiden Albazvina is watching them, to which Will replies confidently that she is, looking down from her lofty perch. Will recalls a childhood friend, Ilaria, who dreamed of seeing the sun and moon together. They promised to become Maga Vanders one day, a title that epitomizes magical prowess. While Ilaria worked hard to fulfill their dream, climbing to the top of the tower, Will's lack of talent left him struggling to keep his promise despite his unwavering determination. Still, Will crumbles under pressure, especially when scolded by Professor Dunner. Upset over Will's reckless descent into the dangerous dungeon, Demuner demands he be more careful. Will apologizes, pleading for forgiveness while also asking for extra credit. Despite his anger, Demuner awards him 2 points for returning with proof of defeating an evil guard in the dungeon. Will celebrates with his pet while Worker prepares paperwork. During this, he asks Will if he's given up on becoming a Magavander. To achieve this, Will must advance to a higher institute, which requires a total of 7,200 credits. Normally, students earn these credits through classes like spellwork, but since Will can't use magic, he knows he won't earn any there. To compensate, he wants to do extra work, but Worker explains that it's nearly impossible to gather enough credits through practice alone. Will is aware of his slim chances, yet he clings to the hope of fulfilling his promise to become a Magavander. Worker warns him that he won't graduate unless he starts earning credits. Will is shocked to learn he needs 4 additional credits by the week's end, only 2 days left. Desperate, he searches his notes for a monster he can defeat for the credits. Though Worker hesitates to encourage Will's dungeon dive, he mentions a Baskerville on the 6th floor that hasn't been submitted yet, which could yield the required credits. Will rushes to hug Worker in gratitude, but Worker warns him not to cling too tightly, it could jeopardize his job. Unfortunately, Cheyenne overhears their conversation and plots to kill the Baskerville first, ensuring Will fails. Later, Will arrives at the 6th floor, feeling confident since he has faced a Baskerville before. His pet is nervous about his overconfidence, but Will reassures it that as long as he avoids the monster's flame breath, he'll be fine. Relying on Kiki's sense of smell, he searches for the Baskerville. Meanwhile, Cheyenne and his friends delve deeper into the dungeon, eager to ensure Will's failure. One friend questions their safety with only 3 of them, but Cheyenne dismisses the concern, believing he can keep them safe. As they venture deeper, Cheyenne prepares to brief his friends when suddenly one of them is punched hard into a wall, leaving him incapacitated. While Cheyenne remains unfazed, the others panic. Hearing the commotion, Will rushes over, surprised to find others in this part of the dungeon. He hides behind a wall, spotting Cheyenne desperately shooting fireballs at an Ewell Sentinel, which is immune to his attacks. Knowing the Sentinel is worth 10 points, Will realizes Cheyenne doesn't stand a chance. Initially, Will thinks of leaving Cheyenne to his fate, recalling how Cheyenne has tormented him since day one, but then he remembers Ilaria's words about his kindness and bravery. He still possesses the goggles she gifted him, a reminder of who he wants to be. Resolving to set aside his grudges, Will rushes in just as the Sentinel prepares to strike Cheyenne. He blocks the attack with his sword, ready to save his rival. Despite their history, back at the academy, Professor Edward bursts into Worker's office, frantic about Cheyenne and his friends venturing into the dungeon without permission. He urges Worker to use his familiar to locate them before they get hurt. Worker grabs his bird and asks where they might be. Edward believes they should be on the 6th floor. Relieved, Worker knows that as long as Will is with them, they'll be safe from any monsters here. Using a crystal ball, Worker shows Edward Will's current battle against the Sentinel. In a stunning display of skill, Will has already severed one of the Sentinel's fingers. As the creature attempts to counterattack, Will skillfully blocks its strike and creates space. Then, in a flash, he dashes in and stabs the Sentinel's shoulder. Cheyenne watches in disbelief, never expecting Will to be so strong. Even Edward is taken aback, prompting Worker to explain that Will's an anomaly with superhuman strength, durability, and unmatched observational skills. As the sentinel strikes again, Will predicts its movement perfectly, dodging and slicing off the creature's arm. While he may lack magic, Will compensates with incredible swordsmanship. As the sentinel writhes in pain, Will grabs its sword and prepares to finish it off. The monster fires a plasma blast as a last resort, but Will's swing overpowers it, cleaving the sentinel in two. Victorious, he approaches Cheyenne, who still harbors resentment but is momentarily grateful for his life. Despite Will's impressive feat, Edward's hatred intensifies at the thought of a magicless student surpassing those with magic. He storms out of Worker's office, furious. Worker, while proud of Will for saving Cheyenne, remains frustrated over his reckless behavior. However, he awards Will 10 points for defeating the Sentinel. 5 years ago, Will was the laughingstock of the Academy due to his lack of magic. His enrollment was only possible because of his friendship with Ilaria, a Magavander. Now, with Ilaria having risen in status, the school felt no obligation to be kind to him. Despite the ridicule, Will perseveres in his efforts to graduate. Accompanied by Worker, Will meets the headmistress for evaluation. She has her doubts about his suitability for the school, but as Will counters her fire spells in the blink of an eye, her skepticism fades. Impressed, she declares that Will can stay, finding it exciting to have someone like him around. Here's the revised version of her script, shortened to about 70% of the original word count, while keeping the main events intact. Will asks the headmistress if he can be by Ellie's side again if he becomes strong enough. She replies that he'll have to work hard and face challenges, but even then, there's no guarantee. As Will leaves, she remarks that it'll be interesting to see what he accomplishes. In the present, Will is in Worker's class, learning about the Tower of Magic. Climbing the tower is essential to reach the Upper Institute and ultimately become a Magivander. Currently, students can either create new magic or earn over 7,000 credits to achieve this, but inventing magic is rare, so most focus on accumulating credits. In this remedial class, everyone, especially Will, is at risk of flunking out. After class, Colette approaches Will, asking how he feels about Worker's strict teaching style. Will admits that while Worker is tough, he appreciates the extra help since most professors wouldn't bother. As they turn a corner, they overhear Shen's friends praising him for defeating the evil Sentinel. While no one questions how Shen survived, it's clear to him that Will's the real hero, and this realization stings. Noticing Will nearby, Shen sees red and approaches him, ready to pick another fight, but knowing Will could easily defeat him, he releases Will's jacket and walks away without a word. Colette asks Will if something happened between them, sensing tension. Meanwhile, Edward bursts into Headmistress Cauldron's office, demanding Will's expulsion. Cauldron questions the sudden desire to expel Will so close to graduation. Edward argues that Will, being a warrior and not a mage, shouldn't be allowed to remain. Cauldron counters by showcasing Will's outstanding scores and notes that he is an exceptional student despite lacking magic. She argues that Will's aspiration to be a Magivander shouldn't disqualify him. Seeing her point, Cauldron proposes a solution. Edward can personally test Will, and if he fails, he can expel him. Edward is surprised she trusts him with this but agrees. Cauldron believes it will be entertaining for Edward, known as the Dark Viper, to assess Will. Back in his locker, Will asks Colette to help him open it. She obliges and spots Will's sword, asking if he's still training. Will explains that he can't use it at school and his roommate won't allow him to do anything dangerous. They head to the library to study together, where Will is focused. Despite already knowing the material, Colette encourages him to take it easy, but Will insists he must work hard to maintain his grades. He finds inspiration in the dwarves, who never back down against powerful mages. Noticing a white strand of hair on Will's head, Colette suggests it's due to overworking himself and offers to pluck it out. Despite Will's protest, she is eager to help. Just then, Edward appears, instructing Will to come to the spell hall alone for an important task. Arriving at the spell hall, Will is shocked when Edward announces a special remedial class. Edward fires a warning shot, making it clear that he means business. If Will can land a successful blow, he'll earn 5 spell work credits, otherwise he'll be expelled. Edward emphasizes that Will cannot refuse this test and begins casting a spell aimed at him. Meanwhile, Worker is summoned to Cauldron's office. She apologizes for the short notice but feels he should know what Edward is planning. Casting a spell, she shows him the test Edward is administering to Will and forbids him from intervening. Cauldron believes it's only fair for Edward to have his request granted, just as Worker had when he monitored Will. However, Worker thinks it's cruel for Edward, a man who nearly became a Magivander, to be the one testing Will. With Edward's power, Will is in serious danger. So far, Will has dodged Edward's low-level black magic, but he can't believe how much power Edward wields. Desperate to fight back, Will attempts to kick Edward from behind, but Edward blocks it effortlessly with a shield spell. Laughing at Will's hopelessness, Edward blasts him away. Will worries he has no chance. Edward is simply too strong. Edward tells Will he'll limit himself to 2 spells, one for attack and one for defense. Even a master of 1 spell can outclass someone who knows 1,000. As Edward casts his fire spell, Will realizes he must escape, but Edward blasts him again. Enjoying the spectacle of Will's struggles, Will falls to the ground, knowing he can't defeat Edward like this. If only he had his sword. Outside the spell hall, Colette is putting away her things, worried about Will's fate. Suddenly, Kiki bursts in, covered in Will's blood. trying to reach his sword in the locker. Realizing something terrible has happened, Colette quickly opens the locker to retrieve the sword. Back inside, Edward approaches Will, taunting him about his dream of becoming a Magivander. He recounts how, in the past, a single mage decimated an army of dwarves, emphasizing that a sword can never match a wand. But even against impossible odds, Will is determined to achieve his dream. When Edward questions Will's motivations, Will reveals he wants to be by the side of the girl he loves. Edward scoffs at this, dismissing it as a foolish reason, but Will made a promise to Ellie he wants to watch the sunset with her, no matter the cost. Just then, Colette bursts into the spell hall and tosses Will his sword. Now armed, Will counters Edward's fire spell. Edward is shocked that Will cuts through it, realizing the sword is special. However, he's still determined to prove Will is no match for him. Terrified of Edward's flames, Will would have preferred to flee, but he knows he must confront Edward to move forward. Charging at Edward, he dodges attacks and gets close enough to slice through Edward's barrier, scratching his cheek. Edward reluctantly admits Will has passed the test, awarding him 5 credits before walking away. Exhausted, Will collapses to the ground. Colette rushes to congratulate him, but he's completely passed out. Cauldron praises Will for his brilliant strategy of diving into attacks to close the distance and strike from a blind spot. Worker adds that Will's sword strike was powerful enough to break through Edward's shield, suggesting he may have what it takes to become a Magivander. In a flashback, Elfie gives Will a pair of goggles before leaving for the top of the tower. Will vows to find a way to join her, promising never to cry or act pathetic again. Back in the present, Will is busy delivering papers to pay for tuition. He runs into Donan, who wishes him luck and mentions he'll be at the tavern later. As Will finishes his route, he spills newspapers everywhere but catches them all except for one. He notices an article about Elfie, who has created 12 original magic spells and is thrilled to see her hard work. His excitement spikes when he learns Elfie has sent a request to the academy. He rushes to his dorm and asks his roommate, Rosti, for help making a magic item on short notice. Rosti agrees, handing Will his new magic items. On the 4th floor of the dungeon, Will arrives to gather Frostwalker ice cores but finds many students there, thanks to Elfie's fame. A massive explosion echoes Shen has just blown up some Frostwalkers, drawing praise from his friends. Shen feels inadequate compared to Will. Knowing he won't get a chance to slay any Frostwalkers with so many around, Will ventures deeper into the dungeon. He spots a girl in danger and leaps into action, slicing through 3 monsters. She introduces herself as Iris, being cut to Worker's lecture on the achievement of creating new magic, which earns advancement to the top of the magic tower. A student asks if this means Elfie is amazing. Worker confirms that Elfie is extraordinarily talented, pointing out that it's nearly unheard of for one mage to create 12 original spells, asserting that she's among the greatest mages to ever live. Colette admits Iris is as amazing as Will said, but Rose teases her about being jealous of Valeria because she likes Will. Embarrassed, Colette snaps at Rose, causing a disruption in class, prompting Worker to tell her to sit down and be quiet. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Will and Iris walk along a passage. After introducing himself, Iris mentions hearing about the upperclassman nicknamed the Unprecedented No Talent, shocking Will. She explains she's 14, 2 years younger, making her a 4th-year student. Will asks if she resents him for lacking magic, but Iris admires those with unique talents, including him for saving her. Curious about her reason for being there, Will learns Iris is fulfilling Elfie's request, hoping to support the Magivander and one day hold up the sky. She explains that the Great Barrier hides the real sky, and when it falls, darkness will return. Iris shares her memorable encounter with Valeria, who saved her from monsters in the dungeon, inspiring her desire to help. Will shows Iris an ice fragment left by Frostwalkers, revealing a powerful Frostwalker is nearby. When Iris doubts his knowledge, Will explains he studies magic and compensates for his lack of power with knowledge and experience. He senses a boss battle ahead, and as a Frost Rex attempts a sneak attack, Will acts quickly to protect Iris. Iris warns that physical attacks won't work against the Frost Rex, which can freeze anything it touches. While most believe long-range magic is the only solution, Will has a plan. As the Rex charges another laser, he readies the magic item from Rosti and maneuvers behind it, evading its blast. Using his item, he latches onto the Rex and ensnares it, exploiting its weakness to fire and explosives. He ignites the wire, leading to a massive explosion that reduces the Frost Rex to rubble. Iris, stunned, realizes Will is much stronger than the rumors suggested. Will retrieves a quality ice core, and they prepare to head back. Later, Iris walks through the wizard tower, removing her disguise and reflecting on her findings about Will. Though he can't use magic, his creativity and battle sense make him an incredible warrior. She reaches a large door and meets with the Magivanders. Apologizing for interrupting, Kay reassures her that no apology is necessary, as their meeting was dull. However, they acknowledge the urgency of their situation. If the sky barrier falls, they would be overwhelmed by celestial hosts. They need to find promising mages to aid in the fight against impending calamity. They ask Iris if her observation mission went well and if she found anyone useful. She confirms she found a promising candidate, a magicless person named Will, and recommends he be inducted into the tower. Eleanor and Carrot oppose the idea, while Z thinks it could be fun and Ellie reserves her opinion. Eller believes it's crazy to bring a magicless person in, and a heated argument brews until Carrot calms everyone down. They decide to wait for the upcoming Grand Magic Festival to evaluate talent, as the top students will emerge from it. If Will doesn't make it, he's not cut out for the tower. After the meeting, Ailey is glad Will is still trying to keep his promise, and says she'll wait for him as long as it takes. The next test involves fighting golems. Shen and Colette go first and defeat their golems easily. Meanwhile, Will struggles attempting to punch his golem from behind, but his classmates mock him for his lack of magic, causing him to get backhanded across the room. As students leave, a few Liana and Wego pass without trouble, and then Julius steps up, casting ice magic to encase the golems in blocks of ice. Julius, one of the Academy's top students, challenges Liana and Wiggle to a friendly rivalry and offers them an ice rose. Yet these three are celebrities, having earned over 10,000 of the total 12,000 credits. Will, who doesn't even have enough credits to graduate, reflects on his situation. Later, Julius and his friends insult Will for his lack of magic ability, and Will steps aside to avoid conflict, hearing them discuss the upcoming Grand Magic Festival, which he hadn't realized was approaching. During lunch, Colette tells Will that his only hope of becoming a Magivander is to be scouted at the festival. It's a massive event held every 2 years, drawing high mages who seek promising talent. Will doubts he'll be chosen since he's failing, and believes he'd need extraordinary magic to get noticed, while Colette insists that there are rumors of watchers looking for talented students. Will dismisses them as urban legends, feeling that a magicless person like him wouldn't fit in. He decides to help with preparations instead, but Colette believes he could change how people view him by entering the festival and showing his potential. Will hesitates, recalling his past attempts to join the festival. Back in his second year, Will faced humiliation when he was booed off stage for using physical attacks, leaving him with a bad reputation he still hasn't shaken. With students practicing earnestly for the festival, Ket reminds him that scouts from the capital will be present, giving Will a chance to be noticed even if he can't earn a place as a Magivander. Despite Ket's encouragement to showcase his abilities, Will is still reluctant to participate without magic. Suddenly, Colette notices something odd about a locker and senses a sound-blocking barrier. Will wonders if it's just a locking spell, but Colette insists it's more than that. She asks Kiki to break the barrier, revealing a hidden staircase that leads to a secret gambling ring where students place bets on the festival. Colette disapproves of the illegal activity, but Will spots Shen, surprised to see him there. Shen gets defensive when Will asks about his presence, but Colette warns him to back off. Shen, who is the fourth best student, justifies his ranking, admitting he's here to check the betting odds on himself. Despite trailing behind the top three by just a few credits, he insists his magic skills are on par with Liana and the others. Afterward, Will's day continues as normal. Before leaving school, Ket asks if he's free to hang out, but he declines, needing to work. That night, Will is at Jan's restaurant, working as a waiter. He serves Donan, who expresses concern for Will's busy schedule delivering newspapers in the morning, attending classes, and working at night. Donan suggests participating in the Grand Magic Festival, but Will quickly dismisses the idea, fearing more humiliation. Janny, the manager, calls Will back to work and points out that his friend Rosie is also helping out as a favor since another worker quit. While cleaning up after the dinner rush, Rosie asks if Will is okay working at the restaurant for such low wages. Will appreciates the staff and enjoys working with them, despite the pay. However, the atmosphere shifts when Julius walks in, immediately insulting the restaurant and its workers. Upon seeing Will, he mocks him for associating with barbarians like dwarves. Donan gets upset, but the other dwarves hold him back, knowing they can't afford trouble with a mage. Julius threatens Donan, reminding him that dwarves as immigrants should be grateful for the humans allowing them to live here. Donan calms himself, knowing that everything Julius said about the dwarves being refugees is true. They fled here after their world was destroyed, but while elves receive sympathy, dwarves face contempt. If Donan were to retaliate against Julius, all dwarves in the city would suffer. Will can't stand this injustice and decides today is his last day working here. Now free from Gina's influence, he confronts Julius, demanding he take back his disrespectful words about the dwarves, who are hardworking despite their struggles. Julius dismisses Will's plea, kicking a plate of food at him. His two cronies prepare to attack, but they fail to realize that throwing food is assault, giving Will the right to defend himself. He grabs the boys and slams them to the ground, shocking everyone, including Julius, who vows to make Will pay for this humiliation. The room begins to freeze as Julius readies an ice attack, pinning Will against the wall. Instead of freezing Will on the spot, Julius decides to save that humiliation for the Magic Festival, challenging Will to a fight there. Will agrees but demands an apology for the dwarves when he wins. Fast forward to the Grand Magic Festival. Excitement fills the air as the Fire Faction Scout urges his team to watch for talented students. The first event, the Dragon Races, sees Lana maintain a strong lead, ultimately winning in record time. As the next event, Crown Attack, approaches, Shen is invited to join a team with Colette and Will, who needs a total of 21,000 credits to compete. Shen is shocked to find Will there, frustrated that Colette invited him instead of Will. Will locks eyes with Julius, the only person on his mind, while Colette explains the situation. Shen is furious, still grappling with the inferiority he felt when Will saved him in the dungeon. As the event begins, the commentator Mike introduces himself and his co-commentator, the feared Professor Edward. Despite his anxiety, Mike announces the main event: Crown Attack. A spell transforms the stadium into a battle map with various zones, and teams will start at the edges, making their way to the center. At the center of the stadium sits a giant crown, and the first team to claim it will win. However, reaching it is no simple feat. The playing field is rigged with all sorts of traps, and while teams are allowed to take the shortest path and obstruct others, this battle is bound to be brutal. Professor Edward explains that the event simulates a dungeon raid, but the crowd is more interested in seeing high-stakes battles among the top students. If there were an illegal gambling ring at the school, which there definitely isn't, Will's team would be the favorite. In stark contrast, Will's team is the underdog, drawing laughter from students who mock his audacity to participate. Will, undeterred, heads to his starting position despite workers' pleas to reconsider. His mind is made up. He's determined to prove himself, even if it means becoming the school's laughingstock. Worker reluctantly accepts Will's decision, reminding him of the risks involved. As the event kicks off, the students charge forward, and Julius's team is the first to stumble into a trap. A horde of golems blocks their path, and while many students would see this as an insurmountable obstacle, Will continues forward at full speed. The crowd jeers at his reckless attempt to confront the golems without magic. Just before he attacks, Will signals Colette, who casts a spell to create a magic gauntlet for him. With this gauntlet, he demolishes the golems, leaving the audience in awe of his abilities. Even with Colette's magic, Will's technique shines through, proving he can handle himself in battle. As predicted, Will is the first to break through the golem horde and rush toward the crown. Meanwhile, Shen, haunted by his past failures, has been pushing himself to improve. Yet, despite his hard work, he finds himself outclassed by Will. With the goal of seizing the crown, the other competitors realize they need to speed up to keep pace. Upon entering the Badlands Zone, Will triggers more traps that unleash rock bullets. Quick on his feet, he uses his gauntlet to punch the ground, creating a rock wall to shield himself and his teammates. Then he asks Colette for assistance again. She conjures a dozen swords, which Will launches as projectiles to dismantle the traps in his path. Mike announces that Will's team is sailing through the Badlands with little challenge, though Shen has yet to contribute significantly. Spectators, eager to downplay Will's achievements, argue that Colette's magic is doing the heavy lifting. While her magic certainly aids him, it's Will's own skills and reflexes that are truly making the difference. Scouts take notice of Will's remarkable ability to detect and counter traps, and even Edward can't ignore his impressive performance. As frustration mounts among other teams, their hatred for Will distracts them, leading to their demise in a flower trap that consumes them whole. Despite the brutal obstacles, Will continues to lead, proving his worth time and again. The uproar from the tournament events echoes throughout the stadium, reaching Julius, who asks his teammates for an update. They use a detection spell and find that Will is currently leading by a wide margin. Julius, unconcerned, has a plan to deal with Will personally. Meanwhile, Will and his team reach the final area before the arena, the Enchanted Woods. As Will runs in first, he triggers several magic circles and realizes he's activated a chain circle trap, but he's ready. He knows just how to counter it. By carving around each magic circle and spinning them, he makes them fire at each other, resulting in a spectacular explosion. Mike excitedly announces Will's success, but Professor Edward, annoyed that Will bypass his dark magic minefield so easily, can only click his tongue. As Will gains momentum, he knows he must be cautious. Encounters with other teams become more likely as he approaches the stadium. He intends to ambush Julius, but is met with a sudden attack when Julius fires an icicle at him. It misses, but Will is confused about how Julius could catch up so quickly, especially since he's alone. Before Will can gather his thoughts, Julius unleashes a hail of icicles, forcing Will to flee for now. But as Will runs, he notices Sheen preparing an incredibly powerful inferno spell. Colette warns Will, recognizing that Sheen's aim is likely on him. As Sheen launches the spell, Colette erects a rock wall to shield Will from the flames. The blast creates a shockwave that incinerates the forest. Sheen approaches Will, claiming he may have also taken out Julius. Colette, however, believes Sheen meant to kill Will. She confronts him, but Sheen feels justified in his actions. He joined their team to get a chance to fight Will. Will questions the sudden shift, but Sheen, uninterested in explanations, fires a warning shot. Colette attempts to intervene, but Julius, having survived the blast, blocks her with a wall of ice. As Will considers saving her, Sheen insists on battling first. He shoots fireballs at Will, knocking his sword away. Will tries to reason with Sheen, suggesting they can fight another time, but Sheen is determined to have a duel now. Reluctantly, Will agrees. Sheen remembers the first time he saw Will, feeling sympathy for the bullying he faced. He had wanted to help Will by offering him a chance to join his side, but Will had brushed him off, leaving Sheen feeling rejected and angry. Back in the present, Will races through the trees, evading Sheen's fireballs. He hides behind a tree, but Sheen sends homing fireballs that nearly hit Will, sending him tumbling across the forest floor. Will manages to catch himself with his sword, but is soon struck by another flame attack, forcing him to deflect it. In a moment of distraction, Sheen catches him off guard with a fire whip, swinging him through the forest. Will eventually frees himself, but Sheen is right there, ready to unleash a devastating explosion spell. Will deflects it just in time but grows increasingly frustrated by Sheen's insistence on an all-out fight. He explains that he joined the competition to prove himself, not to engage in personal battles. Will's goal is to seek justice for Donan and the other dwarfs, so he has no time to waste on a pointless fight with Sheen. Sheen, furious that Will isn't taking him seriously, threatens to turn him to ash if he doesn't step up and treat this as a real battle. The crowd gasps in shock seeing Sheen fight Will. His own teammate is unprecedented. Mike turns to Edward for his thoughts, and Edward scoffs, deeming it disgraceful for team members to clash during a competition that emphasizes teamwork. Yet, he can't hide his glee at Sheen undermining Will's chances of victory. As the crowd watches in disbelief at Sheen's betrayal, Rosti worries about Will's safety, though he's also intrigued to see what unfolds. Iris approaches Rosti asking if she can sit with him. He recognizes her and welcomes her to join. She immediately starts cheering for Will, surprising Rosti. He hadn't expected her support, since she often seemed indifferent. Iris admits this is out of character for her, but ever since meeting Will, she's found herself captivated by him. Rosti, feeling a twinge of jealousy over Will's popularity with the ladies, recalls that even Sheen is fighting because he's never received Will's attention. Rosti loves Will most of all, especially since he's his roommate. But he can't help but notice Colette, always by Will's side. Currently she's trying to figure out how to make Sheen stop fighting Will, desperate for him not to lose this competition. Unfortunately, she can't focus on Sheen while dealing with Julius, who mocks her for dodging him. Colette, irritated by his taunts, threatens to make him regret calling her the Earth Princess, a title she despises. Julius, unfazed, launches more icicles at her. Colette counters with earth magic, creating a wall to block the ice. However, Julius isn't just aiming at her. One icicle hits the ground and activates one of Edward's traps, ensnaring Colette in a massive energy blast. Meanwhile, spectators notice something odd about Julius. He appears on every screen at once, fighting all the students in the competition simultaneously. His method remains a mystery. Julius then challenges Weagle's team, who welcomes the challenge. Weagle, wanting to return the ice flower Julius gave him, waves his wand, making the flower appear in the sky. This distracts Julius long enough for Weagle to create a magic circle beneath him, obliterating Julius in an instant, while others are confused. Weigel recognizes this as Julius's trump card. He admires the level of magic involved, noting how impressive it is. Mike, who bet all his money on Weagle, is hyped to see his impressive performance. Above the stadium, two elf girls from the elf faction watch the festival. Leafa asks Phyllis what she thinks of the academy students. Phyllis comments that they're doing about as well as she expected. The general opinion is that either Julius or Weagle will win, and Will might have had a chance if Sheen hadn't acted this way. They wonder what could have caused Sheen to behave so rashly. Back with Will and Sheen, Will is bewildered by the hatred directed at him. Since enrolling, he's never done anything to deserve this. Bullied relentlessly for his lack of magic, he always felt like a failure and never sought recognition. When Dean tried to help him, Will mistook it for another form of bullying and walked away. Returning to the fight, Will narrowly dodges another fireball, but Sheen summons a Firehawk Guardian high-level magic that shocks Will. As the Guardian swoops in, Will reacts quickly, stabbing his sword into the ground and leaping over it, slicing off one of its wings. However, the Guardian regenerates instantly and charges at him from behind. With Sheen attacking from the front, Will must think fast. He dodges the Guardian's attack and shifts his sword to block Sheen's assaults, struggling to hold his ground against the flames. Finally, he deflects a fireball, leaving both him and Sheen winded. Back at the stadium, Edward watches in shock at the unfolding chaos. At this level of skill, Sheen displays abilities far beyond what a typical student should manage. Not only did he cast a powerful fire spell at the beginning of their fight, but he also summoned a Guardian flawlessly to assist him. The scouts hadn't realized Sheen had such precise control over his magic it contradicted their reports, which labeled him a decent but not outstanding student. Something must have happened recently to spark this remarkable improvement. They'll need to prepare a new report for Carrot, as it seems they've found their latest scouting candidate. Will acknowledges Sheen's newfound strength but is quickly scolded by Sheen for holding back. Sheen wants Will to unleash the power he showed against the evil Sentinel. However, Will believes the situation is different. Fighting to kill a monster is one thing, but he sees no reason to unleash his full strength against Sheen. Sheen is incredulous that after all the years of bullying Will and humiliating him at every turn, Will still won't acknowledge him. While Will has never claimed to be free of resentment, he's thought countless times about getting revenge for Sheen's actions, but now isn't the moment. He needs to focus on defeating Julius. Hearing Will's words fuels Sheen's anger. Will's indifference drives him mad. He just wants Will to see him as a worthy rival, not an insignificant obstacle. While Will never acted selfishly, he secretly longed for recognition of his abilities, but he never thought it would happen. Now that he realizes Sheen wants his acknowledgement, Will understands he must face him seriously. Sheen beams, pleased that Will is finally treating him as a true opponent. As Sheen begins to cast another spell, Will realizes he can't attack while the Guardian is active, so he decides to wait for the perfect moment. As Sheen completes his incantation, He commands his guardian to attack while casting a wide-range annihilation spell. This dual assault would typically be unavoidable, but Will has already mapped the fireball's trajectories. He darts forward, skillfully navigating between the gaps and leaps into the air, destroying the guardian's core. With no obstacles left, he charges straight at Shein. Shein expects this from Will but isn't without defenses. He casts a last-minute fireball just as they're about to clash, but Colette unexpectedly creates a giant rock wall between them. Both Will and Shein are taken off guard, tumbling to the ground. As they recover, they see a furious Colette, most of her clothes singed away. Will asks her what happened to Julius. Colette replies that she beat him to a pulp, but he turned to ice and vanished. Shein is confused by her statement, but then he notices Colette's burned clothing and comments that she's showing too much skin for a noble lady. Colette retorts that it was his flames that caused the damage in the first place. She insists that Will should continue on without them, urging him to catch up to Julius before he claims the crown. Shein tries to argue that their duel isn't over, but Colette cuts him off, emphasizing how crucial it is for Will to defeat Julius. This is his best chance to prove his capabilities. Will stops to thank Colette for her concern but insists he can still make it in time. He apologizes to Shein, promising they can finish their duel another day. However, Shein, eager for a resolution, remains determined to fight today. Back at the stadium, Julius's team is the first to arrive, seemingly unstoppable, but just outside, Will races at full speed. Just as Julius's team is about to claim the crown, Will crashes into the arena, declaring Julius, "It's time to settle this in the magic tower." Ilaria sits peacefully by the window, lost in meditation, when her assistant, Sissa, enters the room. At first, Sissa apologizes for interrupting Ilaria, but then she realizes Ilaria is just asleep. With a playful smack on the head, she wakes her up. Ilaria groans, complaining that Sissa didn't need to hit her that hard. Sissa retorts that Ilaria should take her status as a Magivander more seriously. It's a massive responsibility, and Ilaria spends most of her time either napping or gazing at the world below. Curious, Ilaria asks Sissa why she's here. Sissa replies that she has a list of promising candidates selected by the scouts. As Ilaria examines the list, Sissa mentions that this year's festival candidates are exceptional, but one stands out: Julius from the Ice faction. Based on his stats, Sissa believes he could one day become Ilaria's successor as the Ice Magivander. Ilaria admits that Julius does look promising, but it all hinges on whether the reports about him are accurate. Meanwhile, down in the stadium, Will faces off against Julius and his team, where victory goes to whoever grabs the crown first. Though Julius is closer, he won't be satisfied unless he brutally defeats and humiliates Will in front of the crowd. Will, determined not to lose, readies his sword. Julius kicks off the attack by casting a smokescreen. Blinded, Will can still hear the footsteps of 3 opponents closing in on him, realizing they're trying to surround him. Suddenly, an ice ball hurtles toward him from behind. Will leaps aside and starts running, making himself a harder target. Even with his vision blocked, he anticipates their positions by tracking the trajectories of their attacks. As 2 more ice balls fly at him, he believes he's pinpointed their locations and lunges to attack Julius. But just then, he's blindsided by a 4th attack. Will is knocked back, bewildered about where this 4th strike came from, especially since Julius and his team haven't moved from their original spots. His confusion deepens when he sees 5 versions of Julius standing there. Will realizes this must be some form of illusion magic, but the impacts he's felt are too real. He soon concludes that this spell is too complex. For mere illusions, Julius is creating clones of himself. Moreover, he forgot to mention that these clones can explode on command, and one is right in front of Will. At Julius's command, the clone detonates, encasing Will in a thick layer of ice. While the crowd is excited, they're also trying to decipher Julius's magic. However, Edward and Warner quickly identify it. Warner explains that this is one of the secret arts developed by the gifted Ice Magivander Ilaria. She created and mastered 12 unique ice spells, and Julius is currently using the first in the series, Aris Weiss. This spell creates icy copies of the caster. We'll see these at Julius's audacity to wield one of Ilaria's spells. Julius smirks, claiming his natural talent enabled him to learn it independently, believing he's now on par with a Magivander and that Ilaria isn't so impressive after all. One thing Will won't overlook is someone calling Ilaria a fraud. He breaks free from the ice and charges at Julius, intent on making him regret those words. Julius retaliates with more ice balls, directing his clones to attack Will. These clones move precisely as he commands, keeping Will occupied while he prepares a sealing spell that encases Will in an impenetrable ice barrier. With Will immobilized, Julius casts a giant ice meteor and hurls it toward him. With no escape, Will is crushed under the meteor, and the crowd cheers for Julius's display of strength. Edward can't help but commend Julius's performance, noting he won the battle without moving his real body. Seizing the moment, Julius declares that his ice magic has become unmatched after acquiring one of Ilaria's spells, asserting that he will be the next Ice Magivander. But just as he boasts, he hears the sound of cracking ice. To his shock, he turns around to see the meteor crumbling, and Will emerges mostly unscathed. "Thanks for giving me a chance to cool off," Will says with a grin. I tend to get hot-headed when someone slanders Ilaria's name, but I won't make that mistake again. Julius, flustered, attacks again with his ice clones, but this time Will calmly evades the ice and appears behind Julius's teammates. In one swift motion, he knocks them out, causing Julius's clones to crumble. From the moment he saw Julius's clone spell, Will suspected it was incomplete. Julius could only use the spell briefly and needed his teammates' help for extended durations. If Julius needs all this just to mimic a fraction of Ilaria's power, then he's nowhere near her level. Unlike the Guardian spells that operate independently, Julius's magic lacks the finesse to match a true Magivander. The ice clones demand constant mental control, something Julius clearly lacks if he needs his teammates to use them effectively. Will's assessment feels like a jab at Julius's pride, prompting an enraged response. "Shut up," Julius shouts, launching a barrage of ice roses. Will easily slices through them, but as they hit the ground, they explode, creating another smokescreen that obscures his vision long enough for Julius to conjure his ice clones once more. The clones unleash a flurry of ice balls, but Will deftly dodges each one. Deep down, Julius hates to admit that Will's claim about his incomplete spell is true. He can only manage 4 clones at a time, and without his friend's assistance, his control is limited. He realizes he must remain defensive, yet with all the clones looking identical to him, Will shouldn't be able to find the real Julius. Julius raises a wall of ice to defend himself from Will's sword, but Will slices right through it, sending Julius crashing back with a shard of his own ice. Confused, Julius wonders how Will could have found him so quickly, considering all the clones are perfect replicas. Will smirks and points out the key difference: the clones are made of ice. Their body temperatures are the opposite of the user's, making them cold. Normally a skilled caster can prevent that cold from leaking out, but Julius lacks the finesse. Eventually, the cold causes ice to form under the feet of all the clones. Julius is baffled. How does Will, who can't use magic, understand the intricacies of his spell better than he does? The answer is simple. Will grew up with Elfie, who is a prodigy at magic. He's witnessed her spells up close, studying them meticulously even if he can never match her talent. "I know all the strengths and weaknesses of Ilaria's magic," Will explains. Julius, stubborn and enraged, insists Will's lying. "Ilaria is a Magivander, and this spell is one of her secret arts. How could you ever hope to beat it?" He tries firing another ice shard at Will, but Will barely moves, slicing through it. Julius falls to the ground in defeat. Will calmly states that he respects Julius's talent. Until now, no mage has replicated Ilaria's spells, but he's got some bad news. Elfie invented that clone spell when she was only 2 years old. It's far from perfect and loaded with weaknesses, which Julius is flaunting like he's the next greatest mage. Realizing he's been bragging about copying a toddler's achievements, Julius bursts into hysterical laughter. His overconfidence crashes down as he understands he's grossly overestimated himself compared to Ilaria. But even with this revelation, he's not ready to concede defeat. In a fit of anger, he summons 8 clones, laughing as he declares that 4 isn't his limit. Ignoring control, he plans to overwhelm Will with sheer numbers. Will recognizes that Julius is getting desperate, having faced 10 Elfie clones bullying him in his childhood. 8 Juliuses are hardly a challenge. As Julius casts his spells, Will charges forward, dodging effortlessly. He stabs one of the clones right through the head. Julius, now fearful, realizes that could have been him and starts running away. Will continues his advance, dismantling the clones one by one. No matter what Julius throws at him, Will remains one step ahead, easily blocking each attack. Eventually he destroys all the clones, leaving only the real Julius. With a clenched fist, Will charges at him and delivers a punch so powerful it needs to be replayed 3 times. With that, Will has officially defeated Julius, and the crowd erupts into cheers. His performance earns him respect from the student body, but he's exhausted. With no one left to challenge him, all he needs to do is grab the crown and claim victory. However, while he's preoccupied with Julius, he fails to notice Weigel's team entering the stadium. In a disappointing twist, Weigel is crowned the winner of the crown attack. Meanwhile, high up in the Magic Tower, California informs Elfie that the crown attack has concluded. But Elfie, unable to bear the thought, asks Sissa if there are any spells to rewrite the past or erase memories. Sissa mentions there might be something in the Forbidden Spells book, but she refuses to let Elfie use it for such a trivial reason. Elfie, on the verge of tears, reveals her guilt. She never intended to bully Will, she just wanted to play with him back then. Now the whole school thinks she tormented him. Down in the stadium, Will accepts his loss in the crown attack and takes a seat to rest. At the same time, Shen glares at him, realizing that if Will could defeat someone like Julius, he needs to work harder to be a worthy opponent. Colette rushes over to Will, relief flooding her as she sees he's okay. "I'm so glad you're safe," she exclaims. Will, however, feels guilty for not grabbing the crown and putting her and Shen through so much stress. "At least I kept my promise to Elfie," he says. While he may not have won the event, it's still a victory for him since Julius took such a big loss. Later that night, the group gathers at the bar for a celebratory dinner. Donan asks if Will got scouted by the tower, but Colette sighs, explaining it was expected since Will's team had an internal battle and he didn't actually win. It's Shen's fault, she adds. Will could have easily won if Shen hadn't thrown a tantrum during the event. Where's Shen now? Rusty asks. Will explains he tried to invite him, but Shen seemed uninterested. Donan shrugs it off, saying it's fine. You beat Julius and got him to apologize. That's a win in my book. Meanwhile, Julius is in the back, begrudgingly washing dishes as part of his apology to the dwarves. He hates this menial task but knows he has to keep his word since he lost to Will. While everyone else enjoys the festivities, Colette notices a worker looking worried. She asks if he's not enjoying the party, but he shakes his head. I didn't stop Will from entering because I saw how motivated he was to win, but now that he's shown the whole school what he's capable of, I'm worried about how they'll treat him. Colette assumes people would treat Will better now that they see his strength, but the worker replies it's never that simple. The next day at school, students prepare for the all-student practice event, which involves a week of dungeon diving. Many students are anxious and still deciding on their parties. As Will walks down the hall with Colette, a couple of classmates approach him nervously. Will you join our team for the dungeon raid? We saw how powerful you are. Before he can respond, another group of students chimes in, claiming they want him too. Soon students are arguing over who gets to team up with Will. Colette watches, realization dawning on her. This is what Warner meant now that everyone knows Will isn't weak. They all want to be his friends. It feels hypocritical, eh? She steps in front of Will, shouting at the other students for having the nerve to befriend him after all the bullying he endured. Will must be angry about this, right? Surprisingly, Will smiles, saying he's just happy to have people being nice to him for once. One girl tells Colette to back off and let Will choose, but just as she tries to persuade him to join her team, Colette smacks her hand away. I already have plans to go shopping with Will tomorrow. She didn't mean to ask him out on a date, and later that night, Colette cringes at her impulsive words. When her roommate Rose teases her about the date, Colette protests. I didn't mean for it to be a date. Rose doesn't argue but reminds her to prepare for it. You should put in some effort, otherwise it'll be rude to Will. Colette agrees, realizing she wants to make a good impression. Meanwhile, in Will's room, he's studying when Rusty asks about his plans for the next day. With no classes scheduled, Rusty wonders if Will go into the dungeon again. Will informs him he actually has a shopping date with Colette. She convinced him to go since he needs supplies for the all-student practice event. Will thinks it's no big deal, but Rusty clearly feels jealous. The next day, Colette waits nervously in the city square for Will to arrive. Even though she asked him out unintentionally, she's determined to make this a proper date. When Will arrives, he greets her with a smile and compliments her new dress and hairstyle, making her blush. Just as they're about to head off, Rusty comes running over. Colette is puzzled by his presence, and Will explains that Rusty insisted on tagging along for the shopping trip. It'll be more fun with me around, Rusty claims, grabbing Will's hand as they set off. Colette starts to question Rusty's relationship with Will, feeling a twinge of jealousy. They're holding hands as she wonders if Rusty's trying to steal Will from her. But it's still not weird after all. They're wearing socks the entire day. As the shopping trip progresses, every time Colette tries to spend time with Will, Rusty interrupts. By the end of the day, Colette hasn't had a single moment alone with him. Frustrated, she finally asks Will, what's up with you and Rusty? You two are way too close for just regular roommates. She accuses Rusty of secretly being a girl because of his pretty face. Will laughs and counters that can't be true. We take baths together, and he has more length and girth than I do. Sure, Rusty may be a little handsy, but he always says no homo, so it's probably just his way of being friendly. Rusty soon returns with 2 drinks, handing one to Colette and Will. Will notices that Rusty didn't get one for himself. Rusty shrugs it off, saying he'll just share Will's drink. Colette, fed up with Rusty's antics, interrupts and offers her drink instead. This annoys Rusty, who glares at Colette and tells Will to finish his errands without them. After some back and forth, Will agrees to leave them behind. Once Will is gone, Colette turns to Rusty and bluntly asks if he's really just Will's roommate, because it looks like he's too affectionate with him. Rusty stands up and positions himself in front of Colette, asserting that he loves Will more than anyone else and won't let her take him away. Colette counters that she's also close to Will, recalling how they used to hug all the time until 4 years ago, a thought that embarrasses her. Rusty dismisses her claim, stating that he takes baths with Will every night, which he believes makes him more intimate with Will than she is. As they bicker over who has more claim to Will, he heads toward the blacksmith shop down an alleyway. Suddenly he hears someone call his name, and turns to find Lena standing behind him. He's surprised to see her, thinking someone as renowned as the top student wouldn't have business with him. Lena tells him she has something important to discuss and asks him to follow her. After a short walk, she leads him to a room with Julius, Shine, and Weagle. She thanks everyone for coming and explains that since this is the final term of their last year, the all-student practice exam is approaching, and she wants the 5 of them to form a team. Sheen and Julius exchange incredulous glances, refusing to believe Lana would suggest Will for their team. Will feels out of place, especially with 2 people who dislike him in the room. Lena seems oblivious, remaining steadfast in her decision. Just as Sheehan stands up, looking ready to throw a punch, Wiggle waves his wand, casting high-level illusion magic to calm everyone down. He tells them there's no need for this barbarism and suggests they at least hear Liana out. Once everyone is calm, Liana explains that she wants to form a team of the Academy's best students and those who stood out at the festival. That's why she thinks Will would be a valuable addition. Julius scoffs, stating that having someone like Will who can't use search would only slow them down. He adds that just because Will smashed his face and doesn't mean he'll be an asset. Sheehan also wants Will off the team, simply because he dislikes him. Wiggle chastises them for letting their petty grudges cloud their judgment, emphasizing that Will has already proven he can defeat both of them. Will possesses incredible brute strength and agility, outclassing Julius and Sheehan's most powerful magic. Julius rolls his eyes, jabbing at Wiggle for acting high and mighty despite being second in credits. Wiggle responds confidently, saying he respects Lana's opinion as the top student. If she says Will is skilled enough, then he respects him too, though he still doesn't hold any respect for Julius or Sheehan. Liana interjects, stating her goal is to use this team to climb the tower and secure a brighter future for herself. She wants to guarantee her success as the top student. Wiggle, confused, asks why she's going through all this trouble when her festival performance should have been enough to earn her a spot. Liana admits that the Thunder faction did reach out to her, meaning she has a guaranteed post-graduation placement, but that's not enough for her. All the students at the academy are basically leftovers who weren't good enough to advance before graduation. In her family, many mages die young, so she wants to avoid that fate by aiming for the top. Liana asks everyone interested in forming the team to drop a coin in the goblet to show their commitment. Wiggle is the first to accept, declaring that there's no team that could achieve better than this one. Julius agrees, hoping to earn more credits, and so does Sheehan. Now it's Will's turn, and he feels uncertain about what decision to make as the evening wears on. Will finally returns to Rosie and Colette, who have been worried sick about him. Although he doesn't explain his absence, he mentions he's joining the Hannah team for the all-student practice later. During a briefing, the instructor informs the students that floors once off-limits are now open, allowing access to floors 7 through 10. This means they can earn more than 1,000 credits at once, making it a prime opportunity to make up for lost credits or achieve new ones. However, they must exercise caution, as last year 4 students were eaten by monsters. Professors will be stationed at key locations to ensure safety, but students have a knack for getting into trouble. As the Hannah team enters the dungeon, Colette tags along, despite not being invited. When Lena points this out, Colette defiantly claims she must follow Will. Rosie wishes to join, but as an artificer he must stay at base camp. Still, he prepares magical items for Will before the all-student practice exam kicks off. Lord Carriot learns about the exam, but doesn't recall signing up as the representative of MJ Evander. The messenger insists someone must take the job, and Carriot is the only serious option. He reluctantly accepts while questioning why their king hasn't returned from his expedition as the barrier nears collapse. Back at the practice exam, Lena's team takes off immediately. Will is eager to excel and ascend the tower to meet Alfie. Just then, Lena signals Wiggle to cast a wind spell, launching everyone off a cliff. Before they crash, Wiggle casts another spell to break their fall. As Will stands up, a crimson ant appears, followed by a swarm. Will, being a mage, isn't suited for close combat, but he tells Wiggle to hold off, trusting Lena to handle it. Lena from the knightly Oenas family excels at close combat spells. She warns the group against competing with other students for credits and stresses the importance of staying ahead. Will remembers Worker teaching him that the search spell is crucial in dungeons, as it helps identify monsters and anomalies quickly. Unfortunately, he can't use it, so he often misses monsters until they're already defeated. Eventually, Will defeats a monster, but Wiggle quickly casts a spell, eliminating the rest in the area. Lena believes Will hasn't had the chance to show his skills, but Julius argues that he's just slowing them down, since he can't use the search spell. Anges can absorb magic traces from defeated monsters to verify kills, but Will must collect monster drops, which slows him down. As the group moves ahead, Will scrambles to catch up. Colette asks Will if he's alright, and he assures her he's fine, knowing he's a liability to the team. He's determined to contribute somehow. But as the day passes in the dungeon, he hasn't managed to do anything useful. When Lena suggests a break, everyone is relieved, although the area isn't exactly safe with monsters lurking nearby. Wiggle uses illusion magic to create a wall of flames, though not hot. It's enough to deter most monsters. Lena asks Will to distribute food rations, but when it's Wiggle's turn, he refuses to let Will come closer, insisting he doesn't want to touch someone he views as unworthy. The snobbish attitude stems from the elves' culture, where they only associate with those they deem competent. Will brushes off Wiggle's comments. He understands elves have their quirks and magical superiority, even if they seem arrogant. Once everyone settles, Lena revisits their plan. Their goal is to defeat Nebus, the boss of the 10th floor, worth over 100 credits. It's known to be dangerous, and many students have perished in the fight. Wiggle, bored of weak monsters, suggests skipping ahead to the boss fight. Lena agrees, proposing they take the shortest route to conserve magic. Will hesitates. He's earned only 5 credits today. and knows he needs to step up. As the team journeys toward the 10th floor, we glimpse deeper into the dungeon, where a dangerous individual has just killed a couple of students. Back with Will's group, Julius feels confident due to the monster corpses scattered around, but there are no signs of other teams, raising concerns. Will inspects one of the dead monsters and realizes it was killed by brute force, lacking any magical traces. Ignoring the strange occurrences, Lena prepares everyone for the upcoming fight. However, as they near Nebus's lair, Will feels uneasy. The silence is unsettling. They should have encountered Nebus by now. Will raises his lantern and discovers the boss is already dead, which could mean danger is still nearby. Lena instructs everyone to use the search spell, but they can't detect anything as it struggles against well-crafted traps and clever monsters. Suddenly, Will hears a sound above and warns everyone just before a monstrous creature fires a laser beam. In the chaos, Weagle is taken out in one hit. As the group retaliates, the monster strikes the ground, causing the floor to collapse and sending them deeper into the dungeon. Will reacts quickly, rushing to help the unconscious Weagle as they fall into a red-lit area. Noticing Weagle's severe arm injury, Will knows he needs medical supplies. Meanwhile, Sheehan and Julius find themselves on the same floor, terrified, as the 11th floor is known as a danger zone only high mages can survive. Leanna realizes the monsters here are more powerful, and though she reassures Colette that her injury isn't severe, she knows they shouldn't be separated from the others for long. Weagle wakes to the sound of a giant snake falling beside him, confused about how Will could have defeated it. When Will tries to help, Weagle swats his hand away, refusing assistance from what he calls a talentless failure. Will insists he doesn't care about Weigle's prejudices. He's determined to treat his arm. Weagle reluctantly agrees to handle it himself, but asks Will to bring him the supplies. After Weagle finishes patching himself up, Will reflects on their dire situation. With Weagle injured and their supplies ruined, they're at a disadvantage. Thankfully, Will still has the magic items Rusty prepared, and he knows Colette and the others should have enough food for a few days. However, in extreme conditions, survival is unpredictable. Will realizes he needs to find them before it's too late. He urges Weagle to get moving, but Weagle insists they should stay put and wait for help. Will counters that staying still as foolish monsters have already attacked them, and with a creature like that on the 10th floor, help won't come soon. Meanwhile, at one of the base camps, panic erupts as monsters raid the area. Worker calls Professor Elisa, who grimly reports that 2 other professors have been killed, and she's lost contact with the 9th and 10th floors. Suspecting foul play, Warner concludes the practice event is cancelled, and both he and Edward rush to assist the students, while Rusty looks on, worried. On the 11th floor, Will and Weagle navigate the dungeon, with Weagle anxiously spamming the search spell to detect monsters. Will advises him to conserve magic. He can sense monsters within a 70-meter radius, while Weagle's search can extend to 200 meters. Weagle doesn't grasp how Will remains calm in such a terrifying place. Will explains he spent a lot of time in dungeons to make up for his lack of credits, giving him valuable experience. Suddenly, Will senses monsters closing in on them. He instructs Weagle to handle one behind while he takes care of 2 in front. Weagle casts a wind spell, knocking an orc down, but is shocked to see Will effortlessly slice through the other orcs. Although Weagle knows Will is capable, he can't believe how well he's faring against such threats. The orc Weagle fought gets back up, and with no time for a counterspell, Weagle panics and tries to use illusion magic to distract it. When that fails, he screams in terror, but Will swiftly slashes the orc in half. Will reassures Weagle, explaining that the orcs are blind so illusions won't work. He encourages Weagle not to feel down. He's a talented elf. However, Weagle feels like a failure, especially compared to his peers. After 6 years at the academy, he's still there while others have ascended the tower. They labeled him a disgrace, claiming his illusion magic is inferior ordinary illusions without physical form. Will struggles to understand how Weagle can be seen as a failure when he's among the top 3 students. Yet remaining in the academy means he's merely the best of those left behind. Lena shares this view. True talent should lead to ascension. Over the years, she's watched others pass her by, realizing that her title as the Academy's top student means little in a broader context. Weagle remembers his sister Eleanor, whom he admired deeply. Raised together, he hoped to stay by her side. But one day, during magic practice, Eleanor, despite being a novice, demonstrated extraordinary skill, making her a candidate for the new Elf Queen. She was taken away, and Weagle trained hard to catch up but always fell short of his peers. This insecurity led him to scorn mages like Will. Weagle braced for Will to mock him after sharing his story, but instead he saw a smile on Will's face. Weagle insisted he didn't need comforting. He believed he would only hinder Will. Standing up, Will declared he wouldn't leave Weagle behind, confident he could protect him, until he was strong enough to fight again. Minutes later, the duo faced level 5 monsters, but Will effortlessly cut them down. When he checked on Weagle, he was puzzled as to why Will would risk himself for someone like him. Will replied he believed Weagle was a good person. Suddenly, Will sensed something behind them. Weagle used his search spell but found nothing. The sound was the dungeon birthing a monster. As a dungeon pit opened above them, green liquid spilled out, and terrifying creatures called Balers emerged. These monsters were notoriously difficult to defeat, immune to physical attacks and resistant to magic. Will asked Weagle to lend him his strength, but Weagle broke down, convinced his defective illusion magic would fail. Will reassured him that mistakes happen if they let fear stop them. They'd never progress. Weagle warned that if he messed up, Will could die, but Will promised he wouldn't let that happen. He had a dream to reach the tower and reunite with Elfie. Death was not an option. Weagle, struck by Will's determination, admired his courage. As the Balers began their assault, Will distracted them, but his sword had no effect. Desperate, Weagle raised his wand, but his magic failed him, leading him to believe Will would perish because of his incompetence. The Balers aimed their blasts at Will, but at the last second, Kiki created a shield to protect him. He cheered Will on, urging Weagle to try again. Hearing "I believe in you" from Will filled Weagle with motivation. No one had ever believed in him before. With renewed determination, Weagle finally cast his illusion magic correctly, creating a forest that destroyed the Balers. Will cheered for Weigle's success, but when he turned he saw Weagle kneeling, apologizing for his earlier behavior. Realizing Will was a true warrior, Weagle expressed his respect. Will smiled, saying he had always respected Weagle, and they shook hands, solidifying their newfound friendship. Next, Will pulled out a magic map Rusty made, which would automatically chart the area using their blood. Kiki could also track Colette and Sheehan's scent, provided traces remained. Meanwhile, Julius and Sheehan navigated the dungeon. Julius, feeling thirsty, asked Sheehan for water rations. Sheehan had some but warned against wasting it. Instead, he suggested Julius create ice to drink, but Julius refused, insisting he couldn't waste magic. After their argument, Julius used his search spell, sensing no monsters, which allowed him to relax. Suddenly, Sheehan yanked Julius into cover. Confused, Julius questioned Sheehan's actions, but Sheehan pointed out the flaws of the search spell. Some demons could avoid detection. Using a heat-sensing spell, Sheehan detected an approaching group of Yule sentinels, dozens of them, which was unusual. Julius speculated the influx might be due to the monster on the 10th floor. As Sheehan prepared to face the sentinels, he asked Julius to create clones to distract them. Julius warned against it. Surviving against so many sentinels was impossible, but Sheehan was determined. He needed to prove he was strong enough to defeat them after being humiliated by Will. As the Ewell Sentinels attacked the base camp on the 47th floor, chaos erupted among the students. Just as one was about to be crushed, Professor Edward intervened, using his magic to behead the sentinel and save them. He ordered everyone to retreat to the 6th floor. Worker arrived on a sky racer, ready to take Edward deeper into the dungeon to rescue more students. Fortunately, most students hadn't reached the 10th floor yet, but one team, the Hannah team, had already made it to the 10th floor, aiming to defeat the boss. Edward worried about locating them in time, given the floor's size. Worker reassured him, knowing exactly where they were since Kiki was with Will, and her gemstone was linked to one in Warner's hand. Meanwhile, Colette and Lena were leaving stones behind to retrace their steps. Colette asked how long they had been stuck. Lena replied it had been 16 hours. They were running low on food and water, and the relentless monster attacks left them no time to rest. Colette credited Lena's skills for their survival, but Lena felt guilty for suggesting they rush to the 10th floor. Colette reassured her, saying it wasn't her fault. The monsters were to blame. Suddenly, Weagle and Will sensed a nearby mage and rushed around a corner to find Sheehan standing atop a mountain of sentinel corpses. Weagle was impressed, but Julius emerged, claiming he had sacrificed dozens of clones for Sheehan to win. Will was relieved they were alive, but realized Lena and Colette were still missing. Julius thought the girls were with Will, and since no one knew where they were likely still on their own. As they talked, Colette noticed someone approaching, looking like Professor Bruno, but Lena stopped her, sensing something was off. When Bruno's head fell off, the headless figure delivered a message, revealing his partner, Mars, who scolded him for failing to stop the girls. Headless bragged about killing the professors, claiming he and Mars wanted to destroy the false sky, suggesting a plot to bring about the calamity warned in their lore. Before the girls could react, Headless launched a slash spell at them, but Will intercepted it just in time. He charged at Headless to buy them time, but Headless blasted him away. Relishing the chaos, Mars pulled him back, reminding him they had a job to finish. Headless opened a teleportation gate, instructing Mars to handle the kids. Suddenly, the monster they had faced on the 10th floor teleported in, leaving them no escape. Duke unleashed an energy blast that nearly killed them all, forcing Will to command a retreat into a nearby passage. Weagle stayed behind to stall Duke, casting an illusion to create a wall of roots. However, Duke simply tore through with brute strength. As Weagle neared danger, Will dashed in to drag him out of the way, narrowly avoiding a blast that caused a cave-in, separating Duke from the others. Now safe for the moment, Colette asked what kind of monster Duke was and why he was so powerful. Will recalled reading about it in the Academy's library. It was an Ewell Grand Duke, a member of the Greater Demon class, typically found on the 25th floor. The appearance of such a creature here was concerning. The Hannah team suspected the Ewell mages were behind their current troubles, but bigger problems loomed. They had lost Duke for now, but he would be searching for them, having ordered all demon-type monsters in the area to hunt them down. Their chances of survival seemed bleak, and Julius was starting to panic. He didn't want to die down here. Lena blamed herself for their hopeless situation. Injured, exhausted, and trapped in dangerous territory with limited supplies, her guilt made Julius's fear understandable. Just then Will spoke up, determined to fight back. Survival demanded it. He explained that while demons covered a vast territory, defeating their leader would cause disarray. giving them a chance to escape. Julius thought Will's plan was reckless, doubting they could take down Duke alone. Will assured him he wouldn't force anyone to join if they didn't want to, but Weigel expressed his trust in Will's strategy. Colette and Xian agreed, recognizing Will's knowledge of dungeons, even if Xian still harbored doubts. Turning to Lena, Will acknowledged her hesitance but urged her to trust his judgment. She agreed, naming him their leader. Julius was still skeptical, insisting they couldn't just follow Will's lead to victory. Will concurred, explaining he needed Julius's strength as an ice mage. Julius alone could replicate Ali's magic, so Will planned to teach him one of her secret techniques. A short while later, Will dashed across the dungeon floor toward Duke. As he got close, Julius began casting a spell from a ledge, but Duke unleashed a deadly blast. However, it was merely a clone, allowing Julius to cast more spells uninterrupted. Normally an interrupted spell must restart, but if a clone is destroyed mid-casting, another can take over, buying time to cast advanced spells. Despite the difficulty of maintaining multiple clones, Julius pressed on. As his clones fell, he had to run out of cover to complete his spell. Will directed the others to distract Duke so Julius could finish. Colette, Will, and Xian launched spells at Duke, but it shrugged them off, as Will had warned that Duke's wings were indestructible. With no time to waste, Will attempted to slash one of Duke's wings, momentarily pushing him down before getting tossed aside. While physical and magical attacks proved ineffective, their goal was to act as decoys until Julius finished his spell. They fought together to keep Duke occupied until Julius could complete his incantation. Finally, Julius unleashed a massive icicle bombardment. Exhausted, he watched as it only slightly injured Duke, a predictable outcome given the monster's strength. However, the damage should leave Duke vulnerable to Lena's close-range attack. Lena darted around the room, getting into striking range, but when she went for the killing blow, she hit an automatic barrier likely set by the Ewell mages. That split second of delay cost her the opportunity. Duke counterattacked, forcing Will to rush in and save Lena. He called on Kiki to shield them, but as Will's goblins fell, he braced himself for one of Duke's blasts. Meanwhile, Warner and Edward raced toward the 11th floor, determined to save the students. Warner couldn't believe a Grand Duke had appeared here. It was unprecedented. They could only hope the students would hold out until they arrived. Back at the battlefield, Weigel used magic to catch Lena after a fierce attack, and everyone rushed over. Lena reassured them she was fine, but Will bore the brunt of the assault. He looked shaken, more shocked that the goggles Alfie gifted him were destroyed than anything else. The Grand Duke was slowly breaking free from Julius's ice, prompting Xian to suggest another attack. However, Lena insisted they needed to retreat. She was willing to hold off the monster, sacrificing herself if it meant everyone else could escape. Colette tried to dissuade her, but Lena blamed herself for not defeating the Duke. Weigel stepped up, vowing to fight alongside her, as Will was the only other human he truly respected. The two charged forward, but as Lena sought to strike, the Duke broke free and blew her away. Witnessing this made Xian paralyzed with fear, believing Lena and Weigel were doomed. He wanted to run, rationalizing that it was the only option. Just then, Will had a mild panic attack without his goblins, who was too terrified to act, shaking uncontrollably. Frustrated, Xian couldn't understand why the one who gave them hope was now cowering in fear. In a moment of fury, he began punching Will, who passively accepted it, until he regained composure and thanked Xian for the wake-up call. With determination renewed, Will grabbed his sword and asked Colette to watch Kiki. Though Shen was confused by Will's sudden change in demeanor, Colette clarified that Will was still terrified but was fighting despite his fear. Chen had never seen anyone battle like that, especially not as a mage up close. It was daunting against such a powerful foe, but Will feared more the idea of running away or losing those he cared about, which fueled his resolve. Colette decided to join Will in the fight, causing Shen to feel ashamed for even considering abandoning the others. As Will strategized, he recognized that the Duke's defenses were impenetrable, but if they could sever its wings, they might stand a chance. Colette created a distraction by firing rocks at the Duke, giving Will and Kiki a chance to regroup. As the Duke charged an array of attacks, Will braced himself, aware that a direct hit would be fatal. But having seen the attack before, he dodged skillfully and soared into the air. Colette, understanding Will's plan, poured all her magic into forging a powerful sword. Burst with it, Will severed one of the Duke's wings, leaving the monster vulnerable. Shen seized the opportunity, riding in on his guardian to distract the Duke while he chanted an advanced spell. When he was close enough, he unleashed an inferno spell at point-blank range, but it wasn't enough to finish the Grand Duke. Just then, an ice shard fell from above, revealing Rosty's presence. Although Will was unaware of it, he recalled the flashback of a woman holding an infant Will, hoping he would one day unite the wand and sword. An idea sparked within him. He dashed for his sword, asking Shen to launch magic at him. Without hesitation, Shen complied, allowing Will to absorb the magic into his blade. Empowered like never before, Will sliced the Grand Duke cleanly in half. Exhausted, he collapsed, feeling the strength ebb from his body as his sword returned to normal. Confident the threat was neutralized, he turned to his friends, only to hear terrifying screams from the approaching Ewell sentinels, rushing for revenge after the Grand Duke's defeat. With no strength left to fight, the team stood defenseless. Meanwhile, Warner and Edward saw the sentinels attacking the group from afar, desperately trying to reach them in time. Just before anyone got hurt, Julius was the first target, but before the sentinel could strike, a staff plunged into the ground. Suddenly, dozens of magic circles appeared, and with a single spell, every last sentinel was vaporized. Will recognized it as a high-level annihilation spell, and wondered who could wield such power. As he looked up, he was shocked to see a group of men in white robes. Warner and Edward arrived soon after, stunned to see the leader of the robe figures remove his hood, revealing Aaron, the old king of Amja of Anders, one of the most powerful beings around. What was he doing here, so far down in the dungeon? Will glanced at his teammates, realizing they must have just returned from a raid on the lower floors. Here, Aaron praised the children for their bravery, and soon they were celebrating their survival. But while everyone was focused on Aaron, Will was intrigued by a boy in a black robe who seemed to know something about him. This was their first official meeting, and the boy introduced himself as Finn. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, the evil mages were relieved. They had left the students to the Duke. Even with the Duke's defeat, they had retrieved the artifact they sought, and running into Aaron would have been disastrous. With their goal achieved, they knew things would become much more chaotic in the aftermath of the dungeon incident. Back at the academy, a funeral was held for the 11 individuals who died during the practice exam, all professors who valiantly defended their students. Investigations into the incident yielded no leads. Will and the others were recovering in the infirmary, still puzzled about the identities of the Ewell mages, knowing only that they were powerful deviants capable of killing professors. Colette struggled to accept that Bruno and the other professors were truly gone. If Aaron hadn't arrived, they might all have perished. Still, Lena reminded them they were alive, proud that they made it out without losing a single teammate. She felt grateful to have fought alongside them. Just then, Lena's stomach growled, prompting Colette to offer her some apples she had brought for Will. Lena devoured them rapidly, leaving Colette amazed at her appetite. Lena defended herself, explaining that as a close combat fighter she used a lot of stamina and needed more food to replenish her energy. Not that she enjoyed eating excessively. Colette raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Switching topics, Lena expressed her gratitude to Will for his quick thinking and bravery, which had saved them. Will modestly replied that it was a team effort, he couldn't have done it alone. Julius chimed in, still resentful toward Will, reminding everyone of the moment they almost died while he trembled in fear. He was annoyed that Will's plan had made him expend so many clones. Frustrated, Colette stuffed an apple in Julius's mouth to silence him, completely disregarding the danger of choking. Hey, curious, Shen asked Will about the power he had displayed in the dungeon. Colette echoed this, noting she had never seen him wield magic like that before. It seemed his sword absorbed Shen's spell, but it felt different from a standard enchantment. Once Julius could talk again, he yelled at Will for not using that power earlier, which could have saved them from danger. Kiki then scratched Julius's face, and no one intervened. Shen agreed with Julius, pressing Will for an explanation. Will was just as confused, he couldn't recall much about it, his mind had gone blank, and then he instinctively knew what to do. Colette suggested asking Warner and the other professors about Will's power, as they might have insights. Will recalled Finn, still curious about him, and asked if anyone knew anything about the boy. Weagle noted that Finn was likely from the Finn tribe, a race that couldn't use magic but had accumulated extensive knowledge about dungeons over generations. They had contracts with magic towers to guide powerful mages through the labyrinth. Will was eager to learn more about his newfound power, but he also had questions about Finn. Meanwhile, Finn had just returned from the dungeon and sought out Cauldron. She was relieved to see he made it back safely after such a long expedition, and asked how far they had gone this time. Finn replied that they made it down to the 49th floor, which was no easy feat. He quickly cut to the chase, revealing he had something to show her. He unwrapped the hilt of a shattered sword, and Cauldron's eyes widened as she recognized it. This was the weapon they had received reports about. It belonged to a mage slayer, the same one Finn's group encountered on the 40th floor. In their battle they had lost 20 of their high mages, but eventually defeated all the mage slayers. However, Finn suspected that these enemies weren't spawned naturally by the dungeon. Instead, he believed they were conducting experiments, collecting materials, and crafting weapons down there. Aaron had ordered Finn to return to the dungeon for further investigation, so he wanted to leave the sword in Cauldron's care for analysis. She apologized for the extra work he had to do so soon after returning, but Finn brushed it off, saying he needed to help combat the bad guys lurking in the shadows. Then, Finn shifted the conversation, taking a seat on her desk. He asked why she hadn't mentioned Will to him. They had a deal. Wands were her domain, while swords were his. Cauldron explained that Will was a special case who was a student at the Magic Academy and aspired to be a Magi of Vandersunday. Finn was taken aback by this revelation, and they shared a moment of silence before he sighed in acceptance. This was the first time he had heard of a sword trying to become a wand, but Cauldron believed Will might be exactly what they needed in these challenging times. Finn agreed and backflipped off her desk, deciding to keep an eye on Will's progress while leaving him in Cauldron's care for a little longer. The next morning, Will was up bright and early, diving into his training routine. Colette couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy as everyone else was still recovering from their injuries. Will looked as if he hadn't fought a fierce battle at all. He explained that he felt uneasy just sitting around despite the uncertainty he faced. He had to keep pushing forward toward his goals. Julius, watching from the sidelines, speculated about Will's unusual stamina, joking that he might be part dwarf or something. Weagle shot back, defending Will as his friend and insisting he wasn't anything like the brutish dwarfs. Suddenly Shen got up from his bed and yelled out the window, challenging Will to a duel. This surprised Will, and without hesitation Shen jumped out to confront him. As he landed, he winced in pain from his injuries. Colette tried to dissuade him from fighting, pointing out that he was too wounded, but Shen was determined. If Will was moving, then so would he. Will attempted to explain that a duel wasn't a good idea right now, but Shen reminded him of their promise to duel after the Grand Magic Festival. Well, this was later and Shen wanted his fight. If Will couldn't handle an injured mage like him, he'd have no chance of reaching the magic tower. Seeing Shen's seriousness, Will smiled and raised his sword. As Shen began casting spells, Will ran up the walls of the building, dodging several fireballs. They both seemed to be enjoying themselves, despite the collateral damage they were causing. Just as their duel heated up, Warner spotted them, prompting everyone to scatter to avoid getting in trouble. 2 months flew by, and the students were back in class when Warner entered to address them. He acknowledged that some were still dealing with the aftermath of the practice exam, but they had to keep moving forward. Now that the school year had ended, it was time for their graduation exam. Will had prepared himself as best as he could, and no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was determined to graduate and make his way to the magic tower to be with Elfie. Thanks for joining me on this adventure. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more epic content. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't miss out on the next video. There's always more fun, surprises, and challenges ahead. Until next time, stay awesome and keep exploring.